Hello, and welcome. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Outside, the rain is falling softly against the windows, and the world has grown quiet. The streets are slick and shining, reflecting the warm glow of street lamps and shop signs. Somewhere in the distance, a car passes slowly through a puddle, and the sound fades like a gentle sigh. This is the kind of night made for staying in, for pulling the blankets a little closer, for letting your thoughts drift somewhere safe and tender. Tonight, I have 5 calm, true-to-life stories to share with you. Each one is written like a diary entry, told from my own perspective, as if I'm recounting a quiet memory from my life in the city. These are small moments, bus rides, late-night cafes, bookstores about to close, the simple ritual of coming home. There's nothing frightening here, no sudden sounds, no conflict or drama, just gentle warmth, the patter of rain, and the kind of peace that helps you drift off to sleep. If you enjoy these rainy bedtime diaries, I'd be so grateful if you'd like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. It truly means the world to me, and it helps others find this little corner of calm, too. Now, settle in, let your body relax, let the rain be your companion. This is episode 1, Last Bus in the Rain. Let's begin. Story 1. The last bus home. It was already past 10 when I finally left the office. Time 600 meters. The rain had started sometime in the late afternoon, and by now it had settled into a steady, patient rhythm. Not a storm, nothing dramatic. Just the kind of rain that makes you want to walk slowly, even when you should be hurrying. I stood under the awning outside my building for a moment, watching the droplets catch the light from the lobby windows. The street was quiet. Most of the shops along this block had already closed, their metal shutters pulled down, their neon signs flickering off one by one. I opened my umbrella, a small black one I'd bought years ago from a convenience store during another unexpected rain, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The bus stop was 3 blocks away. I knew the last bus came at 10:32, so I had time. But I walked at a steady pace anyway, my footsteps soft against the wet pavement. The city feels different at night, especially in the rain. During the day, everything moves so fast, people rushing, cars honking, voices overlapping in a constant hum. But at night, in weather like this, the city becomes almost gentle. The sharp edges soften. The noise fades to a murmur. I passed a small laundromat, its fluorescent lights still on, the machines humming faintly behind the glass. Inside, a woman sat on one of the plastic chairs, scrolling through her phone while her clothes tumbled in the dryer. She didn't look up as I passed, but something about the scene felt peaceful. A small ritual carried out in the quiet hours. A few doors down, there was a convenience store with its door propped open slightly, letting out a thin rectangle of warm light and the faint scent of coffee from the machine inside. I thought about stopping for a moment, maybe buying a can of hot tea or a small snack for the ride home. But I decided against it. I wasn't really hungry. I just wanted to get home. The bus stop appeared at the end of the block, marked by a simple metal sign and a small plastic shelter. The shelter was just big enough for 3 or 4 people to stand inside, though tonight there was only one other person waiting. An older man, maybe in his 60s, wearing a beige raincoat and holding a folded newspaper under his arm. He nodded politely as I approached, and I nodded back. We didn't speak. There was no need. I closed my umbrella and stepped under the shelter, shaking off the droplets gently before tucking it under my arm. The rain continued to fall around us, tapping against the plastic roof in an uneven but soothing pattern. I checked my phone. 10:24. 8 more minutes. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and let my gaze wander. Across the street, there was a small apartment building with warm, yellow lights glowing behind curtained windows. I imagined the people inside, maybe making dinner, maybe watching television, maybe already getting ready for bed. There's something comforting about seeing those lights at night, knowing that behind each one, someone is living their quiet life, making tea, folding laundry, resting after a long day. The older man beside me shifted his weight slightly, adjusting the newspaper under his arm. He cleared his throat softly, then returned to stillness. I found myself wondering where he was going. Home, probably. Maybe to a wife waiting with dinner kept warm. Maybe to an empty apartment, quiet and familiar. I didn't know, but I hoped for his sake that wherever I was headed, it felt like home. A few more minutes passed. Then, from the far end of the street, I saw the soft glow of headlights approaching. The bus appeared slowly, its windshield wipers moving in steady arcs, its interior lights casting a faint, golden warmth through the windows. It pulled up to the stop with a quiet hiss of brakes, and the doors folded open. The older man stepped on first. I followed, tapping my transit card against the reader and nodding to the driver, a middle-aged woman with short gray hair and a calm, patient expression. She gave me a small smile in return, the kind of wordless acknowledgement that feels warmer than it should. The bus was nearly empty, just a handful of passengers scattered across the seats, some looking out the rain-streaked windows, some with earbuds in, some already dozing. I chose a seat near the middle, on the left side, next to the window. I set my bag on my lap and leaned back, letting the hum of the engine settle into my bones. The doors closed, and the bus pulled away from the curb. I turned my head and pressed my temple lightly against the cool glass of the window. Outside, the city slid past in a blur of soft lights and wet reflections. Storefronts, crosswalks, the occasional pedestrian hurrying under an umbrella. The rain had picked up slightly, tapping against the window in quick little bursts, then settling back into its slower rhythm. I watched the droplets race down the glass, merging and separating, tracing paths I couldn't predict. There's something meditative about being on a bus at night. You're moving, but you're not the one in control. All you have to do is sit there. Let someone else navigate the streets. Let the city pass by like a slow film, each frame lit by street lamps and neon. I let my thoughts drift. I thought about the day I'd had. It hadn't been a bad day, just a long one. Meetings that ran over, emails that never seemed to end. A lunch break I'd spent at my desk, eating a sandwich I barely tasted while staring at a spreadsheet. But now, sitting on this bus, listening to the rain, all of that felt very far away, like it had happened to someone else, in another version of the city. The bus made a stop. A young woman got on, shaking out a bright red umbrella before folding it up. She sat near the front, pulling out a paperback book and opening it to a marked page. I couldn't see the title, but I liked that she was reading. It felt right, somehow. A small act of peace in the middle of the night. The bus continued on. We passed a park I recognized, a small square with a few benches and a fountain that was probably turned off for the night. The trees lining the edge swayed gently in the wind, their leaves heavy with rain. A single street lamp cast a pale circle of light across the wet grass. I remembered walking through that park last spring on a sunny afternoon when the cherry blossoms were in bloom. I had bought a coffee from a cart nearby and sat on one of the benches, watching the petals drift down like pink snow. It had been a good day. One of those days that stays with you for no particular reason, just because the light was right and the world felt kind. The bus swayed slightly as it turned a corner, and I let my eyes fall half closed. The hum of the engine was steady, almost like a lullaby. The rain continued its soft percussion against the window. The warmth inside the bus wrapped around me like a blanket. I wasn't asleep exactly, but I wasn't fully awake either. I was somewhere in between, that gentle floating state where your body relaxes and your mind wanders freely. I thought about the apartment waiting for me at the end of this ride, the small one-bedroom I'd rented 2 years ago on the 4th floor of a quiet building in a neighborhood I'd grown to love. I thought about the lamp I always left on by the window, a soft, warm light that I could see from the street when I came home late. I'd started leaving it on by accident, forgetting to turn it off in the mornings. But eventually I realized I liked it. It felt like the apartment was waiting for me, welcoming me back. I thought about the little rituals I'd perform when I got home, taking off my shoes by the door, hanging my umbrella on the hook, filling the kettle and setting it to boil, changing into soft, worn clothes that felt like a second skin. Nothing grand, nothing noteworthy, just the quiet comfort of routine. The bus made another stop. A man got off, pulling his hood up as he stepped into the rain. I watched him disappear down a side street, his figure growing smaller until the bus pulled away and he was gone. 5 more stops until mine. I shifted in my seat, settling more comfortably against the window. The glass was cool against my forehead, and I could feel the faint vibration of the engine through the frame. Outside, the city continued its quiet, nighttime routine. A convenience store with its lights still blazing. A couple walking under a shared umbrella, their shoulders pressed together. A stray cat darting across the sidewalk, pausing under an awning to shake the rain from its fur. I smiled to myself. There's so much life happening in these small moments, if you're willing to look. So many little stories unfolding in the spaces between the big ones. The old man with his newspaper, the woman reading her book, the driver with her patient smile. We're all just trying to get somewhere, I thought. All of us on our own quiet journeys, passing through the same rainy streets. The bus turned onto a wider avenue, and I recognized the row of shops that meant I was getting close. The bakery on the corner, closed now, but with its sign still glowing faintly. The dry cleaners with the faded green awning. The bookshop I visited sometimes on weekends. Its windows dark, but inviting even in the rain. 2 more stops. I sat up a little straighter, reaching for my bag. My umbrella was still tucked under my arm, slightly damp, but manageable. I checked my phone again, not for the time, just out of habit. No new messages, no urgent notifications, just the quiet glow of the home screen, reminding me that the world could wait. The bus slowed, and the driver's voice came over the speaker. soft and slightly crackly. Next stop, Maple Street. I pressed the button to signal my stop and stood, holding the rail as the bus came to a gentle halt. The doors opened, and a gust of cool, rain-scented air rushed in. I stepped down onto the wet sidewalk, opening my umbrella in one smooth motion. The bus pulled away behind me, its tail lights glowing red in the rain, and then it was gone. I stood there for a moment, alone on the street, just breathing. The rain was lighter now, more mist than downpour. It clung to my coat, my umbrella, the edges of my hair. The air smelled fresh, clean and green, the way cities only smell after a good rain. My building was just a block away. I could see it from here, its familiar shape rising against the gray sky. The lamp in my window was still on, just as I'd left it. I started walking. My footsteps were soft against the wet pavement, the only sound besides the gentle patter of rain. The street was empty now, all the other passengers from the bus long gone to their own homes, their own quiet rituals. I passed the entrance to a small alley where a pile of cardboard boxes sat soaking in the rain, waiting for morning pickup. A bicycle leaned against a lamppost, its handlebars dripping with water. A single leaf, bright yellow, floated in a puddle near the curb. Time. 700 Maze. Small details, the kind you only notice when you're moving slowly, when you're paying attention. I reached my building and pushed through the front door, stepping into the warmth of the lobby. It was a small space, just a few mailboxes, a worn carpet, and a single elevator at the end of the hall. But it felt like home. I shook out my umbrella one last time before closing it, letting the last of the rain drip onto the mat. Then I walked to the elevator and pressed the button. The doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped inside. Well, 4th floor. The elevator hummed as it rose, and I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes for a moment. Almost home. The doors opened again, and I stepped out into the quiet hallway. The carpet was soft under my feet. The lights were dim, just bright enough to see. Somewhere down the hall, I heard the faint sound of a television. Muffled voices, a laugh track, someone else winding down their evening. I reached my door and pulled out my keys. The lock turned with a familiar click, and I pushed the door open. Home. The lamp by the window glowed softly, casting warm light across the small living room. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. The couch with its throw blanket folded over the arm, the stack of books on the coffee table, the single plant on the windowsill, its leaves pressing gently against the glass. I closed the door behind me and stood there for a moment, just breathing in the familiar smell of my own space. A mix of laundry detergent, the vanilla candle I'd burned last week, and something else. Something I couldn't name but recognized as simply mine. I slipped off my shoes and set them by the door, hung my umbrella on its hook, placed my bag on the small table by the entrance. Then I walked to the window and looked out at the rain. The street below was quiet, slick and shining under the street lamps. A few cars passed slowly, their headlights cutting soft paths through the mist. In the distance, I could see the glow of the city center, its lights hazy and dreamlike in the rain. I pressed my hand lightly against the glass. It was cool to the touch, the rain tracing patterns just inches from my fingertips. I thought about the bus ride, the older man with his newspaper, the woman with her book, the driver's quiet smile. It had been such a simple journey, just a few miles through the rain, from one part of the city to another. But somehow, it had felt like more than that. Like a small gift, wrapped in silence and soft light. I turned away from the window and walked to the kitchen. The kettle was right where I'd left it, next to the stove. I filled it with water, set it on the burner, and turned on the flame. The soft blue glow flickered to life, and I watched it for a moment, mesmerized by the simple act. While the water heated, I changed out of my work clothes. I pulled on a pair of worn sweatpants and an old sweater, the kind so soft from washing that it felt like being wrapped in a cloud. I left my feet bare, the wooden floor cool and smooth beneath my soles. By the time I returned to the kitchen, the kettle was beginning to whisper. I took down a mug from the shelf, a simple ceramic one, pale blue, chipped slightly at the rim from the years of use, and dropped in a bag of chamomile tea. The kettle clicked off, and I poured the hot water carefully, watching the steam rise in gentle curls. The scent of chamomile filled the small kitchen, light, floral, calming. I carried my mug back to the living room and sank into the couch. The rain was still falling outside, a soft, steady presence. I could hear it against the window, a rhythm that had become almost like music over the course of the evening. I curled my feet up beneath me and wrapped my hands around the warm mug. The heat seeped into my palms, and I let out a slow, deep breath. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The quiet after the movement. The stillness after the journey. I took a sip of my tea. It was warm and soothing, spreading gently through my chest. I let my head fall back against the cushion and closed my eyes. The sounds of the night wrapped around me like a blanket. The rain, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant murmur of traffic, softened by the storm. I thought about tomorrow, another day at the office, more meetings, more emails, more routines to follow. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, I was here, safe, warm, home. I opened my eyes and looked around the room, at the lamp casting its soft glow, at the books stacked on the table, at the plant by the window, its leaves silhouetted against the rainy night. This was my life. Small, quiet, unremarkable by most standards, but it was mine. And on nights like this, it felt like more than enough. I finished my tea slowly, savoring each sip. When the mug was empty, I set it on the coffee table and pulled the throw blanket over my legs. The rain continued to fall, soft and steady, a lullaby sung by the city itself. I let my eyes drift closed again. And somewhere between one breath and the next, the day began to fade. The last bus had brought me home. The rain had welcomed me back. And now, finally, I could rest. And that was how my evening ended. Quiet, simple, and exactly as it should be. The last bus had carried me through the rainy streets, past glowing windows and sleeping shops, past strangers on their own quiet journeys. And now I was home, wrapped in warmth, listening to the rain, feeling my body grow heavy with the kind of tiredness that comes from a day fully lived. There would be other buses, other nights, other rainy journeys through the city. But this one, this particular ride on this particular evening, would stay with me. A small memory, a gentle gift. The kind of night that reminds you why it's good to slow down sometimes, to watch the rain, to let yourself be carried home. Speaking of gentle journeys through the rain, That reminds me of another night, not too different from this one, when I found myself in a small cafe, just as it was about to close. Story 2, the cafe at closing time. The cafe was called Moonlight Grounds, though I'd never noticed that name until the night I stayed too late. It was a small place, tucked between a dry cleaner's and an empty storefront on a street I didn't usually walk down. I'd stumbled upon it by accident a few weeks earlier, on an evening when I'd taken a wrong turn and found myself in an unfamiliar part of the neighborhood. That first visit, I'd only stopped in for a quick coffee, but something about the place had stayed with me. The mismatched furniture, the soft jazz playing from an old speaker in the corner, the way the light seemed warmer than it should have been. So I started coming back. Not every day, but often enough that the barista began to recognize me. On this particular night, I'd arrived around 8, after a long day that had left me feeling restless and drained. I didn't want to go home yet. I didn't want to sit alone in my apartment, staring at the walls. I needed something else. Something quieter than a bar, but less lonely than my own couch. So I walked to Moonlight Grounds. It was raining, of course. It had been raining on and off for 3 days straight. One of those early autumn stretches where the sky never quite clears and the air carries a permanent chill. I didn't mind. The rain gave me an excuse to linger. When I pushed open the door, the warmth of the cafe wrapped around me like a welcome. The smell of roasting beans and something sweet, cinnamon maybe, or brown sugar, filled my lungs. I stood just inside the doorway for a moment, letting the cold drain out of me. The cafe was nearly empty. A couple sat in the corner, speaking softly, their hands intertwined on the table. A man with a laptop was typing near the window, his brow furrowed in concentration. And at the counter, the barista, a young woman with short dark hair and a silver ring through her eyebrow, was wiping down the espresso machine. She looked up as I approached. "Rainy night," she said, not a question. "Very," I agreed. She smiled. Just a small one, but warm. "The usual?" I hesitated. My usual was a simple latte. Nothing fancy. But tonight I wanted something different. Something that matched the mood of the rain. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "Something warm. Something cozy." She thought for a moment, tapping her finger lightly against the counter. "Honey lavender latte," she said finally, "made with oat milk and a little bit of vanilla. It's not on the menu, but I make it for myself sometimes on nights like this." "That sounds perfect," I said. While she made my drink, I found a seat by the window, a small table with a worn wooden surface and 2 mismatched chairs. Outside, the rain was falling steadily, catching the light from the cafe's windows and turning the sidewalk into a river of reflections. I watched the rain for a while, letting my thoughts drift. There's a certain kind of peace that comes from sitting in a warm place, while the world outside is wet and gray. It's like being in a little pocket of safety, surrounded by the storm, but untouched by it. The barista brought my latte over, setting it down with a soft clink. The mug was a deep blue, glazed with a pattern that looked like stars. Steam rose from the surface, carrying that promised hint of honey and lavender. "Thank you," I said. "Enjoy," she replied, and returned to the counter. I wrapped my hands around the mug and took a slow, careful sip. It was exactly what I needed, warm and smooth, with a sweetness that wasn't overwhelming, just enough to feel like a treat. The lavender was subtle, floral, without being perfume-like, and the honey rounded out the edges in a way that made me want to close my eyes and savor every drop. I sat there for a long time, drinking slowly, watching the rain. The couple in the corner finished their drinks and left, holding hands as they stepped out into the night. The man with the laptop packed up his things a little while later, giving the barista a small wave before disappearing through the door. And then it was just me. Me, the barista, and the soft hum of the coffee machines. I didn't notice how late it had gotten until she walked over to my table, a soft look on her face. "Hey," she said gently. "We're closing in about 10 minutes. No rush. Just wanted to let you know." I glanced at my phone. 9:50. I'd been here for almost 2 hours. "I'm so sorry," I said, sitting up straighter. I completely lost track of time. She shook her head, smiling. "Don't be sorry. That's kind of the point of a place like this, right? Somewhere to forget about the clock for a while." She had a point. "Can I get you anything else before we close?" she asked. I was going to make myself a cup of tea. You're welcome to one, on the house. I hesitated, surprised by the offer. But there was something about the way she said it, easy, genuine, that made it hard to refuse. "I'd like that," I said. "Thank you." She nodded and walked back to the counter. A few minutes later, she returned with 2 small cups of tea, chamomile for me, peppermint for her, and sat down in the chair across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It wasn't awkward, though. It was the kind of silence that happens between people who are content just to exist in the same space, without the need for words. I looked around the cafe, really looked, for the first time. The walls were painted a deep, warm brown, with framed photographs scattered across them. Landscapes, cityscapes, a few black and white portraits of people I didn't recognize. The shelves behind the counter held jars of coffee beans, tins of loose-leaf tea, and a few small plants in mismatched pots. There was a small chalkboard by the door with the day's specials written in loopy handwriting. A stack of worn paperback books sat on a table near the entrance, with a handwritten sign that said, "Take one, leave one." "I like this place," I said finally. She looked up from her tea, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Yeah," she said. "Thanks. It's been here for about 2 years now. My aunt owns it. I help out on weeknights." "It has a good feeling," I said. "Like time moves a little slower in here." She nodded, wrapping her hands around her cup. "That's what we're going for," she said. "My aunt says the city moves too fast. She wanted to make a place where people could just stop, even if it's just for a little while." We sat in comfortable silence for a few more minutes. Outside, the rain was beginning to ease. The drops fell more gently now, barely tapping against the glass. The streetlights cast long reflections across the wet pavement, turning the ordinary street into something almost magical. Eventually, I finished my tea and set the cup down. "I should let you close up," I said, standing slowly. She stood too, gathering the empty cups with practiced ease. "Thanks for staying," she said. "It's nice to have company on quiet nights like this." I pulled on my coat and picked up my umbrella. Time 600 mirs. "Same time next week?" I asked, only half joking. She laughed, a soft, easy sound. "I'll save you a seat." I stepped out into the night, the door chiming gently behind me. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, barely more than a whisper in the air. The street was quiet, the shops closed, the city settling into its nighttime hush. I didn't open my umbrella. The mist felt good on my face, cool and clean. I started walking, my footsteps soft against the wet pavement. Behind me, I heard the cafe's lights click off, one by one. But the warmth of the place stayed with me, a soft glow somewhere in my chest, like I'd carried a little piece of it out into the night. I thought about the barista and her easy kindness, the honey lavender latte and the chamomile tea, the photographs on the walls and the books by the door. Such small things, really, such simple moments. But on a rainy night, in a city that can feel so big and impersonal, they mattered more than I could say. I walked on, the mist settling on my shoulders, the streetlights guiding my way. There would be other cafes, other rainy nights, other moments of unexpected connection. But this one, this quiet evening at Moonlight Grounds, would stay with me for a long time. A reminder that sometimes the best thing you can do is slow down, find a warm corner, let the clock fade away, and let the rain wash the day clean. The walk home from the cafe took me past a row of shops I knew well, the dry cleaners, the pharmacy, and at the very end of the block, a small bookstore with its lights still glowing faintly behind the glass. I'd almost forgotten how late it was, but something about that warm light shining out into the rainy night made me slow my steps. Story 3. The Late Bookstore. The bookstore was called Ember and Page, and it had been there for as long as I could remember. It sat at the corner of a quiet street, wedged between an antique shop and a place that sold handmade candles. The building itself was old, brick facade, creaky wooden door, a hand-painted sign that swung gently in the wind. At that time, cars. 800 millers. During the day, the bookstore was bustling in its own quiet way. Students from the nearby university came to browse. Older patrons sat in the worn armchairs near the back, reading for hours without anyone disturbing them. Children crouched in the picture book section, their small fingers tracing the illustrations. But at night, especially on rainy nights, the bookstore became something else entirely. On this particular evening, I found myself standing outside the shop at 9:15, my umbrella dripping, my reflection wavering in the rain-streaked window. I'd left the cafe about 10 minutes earlier, intending to go straight home. But as I passed the bookstore, I noticed the lights were still on. Not just one lamp, as if someone had forgotten to switch it off, but all of them, glowing warm and inviting through the glass. I checked the hours posted on the door. Open until 10 p.m. on Fridays. It was Friday. I pushed open the door. A small bell chimed overhead, one of those old-fashioned ones, attached to the door frame by a coiled spring. The sound was gentle, almost musical, and it seemed to welcome me in. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and something faintly woodsy. Cedar, maybe, or sandalwood. The floorboards creaked softly under my feet. The walls were lined with shelves, floor to ceiling, packed with books of every size and color. The lighting was warm and low, coming from a series of antique lamps scattered throughout the store. Each one cast a small pool of golden light, leaving the spaces between shadowy, but not dark. It felt like stepping into another era, a slower, quieter time. Near the front, an elderly man sat behind a wooden counter, reading a thick hardcover with a magnifying glass in hand. He looked up as I entered, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a smile that was both welcoming and unhurried. "Evening," he said. "Wet out there, isn't it?" "Very," I agreed, shaking a few droplets from my umbrella. He gestured toward a small stand near the door. "You can leave that there, if you like. Take your time. We're open for another 45 minutes or so." I thanked him and set my umbrella in the stand, then moved deeper into the store. I didn't have a particular book in mind. I never did when I came here. That was part of the charm. I wandered past the fiction section, trailing my fingers lightly along the spines. Some were smooth and glossy, newer releases, probably. Others were rough, the cloth covers worn soft by years of handling. A few had no titles at all on the spine, just faded colors and the faint ghost of gold lettering. There's something deeply satisfying about browsing a bookstore with no agenda, letting your eyes land where they will, pulling out a volume at random, flipping to a page in the middle, seeing if the words catch you. I found myself in the poetry section, a small alcove near the back of the store, with a single armchair tucked into the corner. The chair was upholstered in faded green velvet, and a small reading lamp stood beside it, casting a warm circle of light. I pulled out a slim volume at random. Mary Oliver. I'd read her before, but not this particular collection. I sank into the chair, letting the cushions embrace me, and opened the book. Outside, the rain continued to fall. I could hear it faintly, a soft percussion against the windows. But in here, the world felt muffled, enclosed, safe. I read a poem about the morning and another about wild geese. I read one about walking through a forest, the light slanting through the trees. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that settled into my chest like a warm stone. Time passed without my noticing. At some point, I heard footsteps approaching. Soft, unhurried. I looked up. He timed 600 minutes. The old man from the counter was standing at the entrance to the alcove, his hands clasped gently in front of him. "Finding anything good?" he asked. I held up the book. "Mary Oliver." He nodded, a look of quiet approval crossing his face. "A wise choice for a rainy night," he said. Her words have a way of settling the mind. We talked for a few minutes, about poetry, about the store, about the neighborhood. His name was Harold, and he'd owned the bookstore for over 30 years. His wife had helped run it until she passed a few years ago, and now he kept it going mostly on his own, with occasional help from a nephew who lived nearby. "I think about retiring sometimes," he admitted. "But then I come in on a night like this, and someone wanders in out of the rain, and I remember why I started this place." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. He smiled, a small knowing smile, and gestured towards the book in my hands. "Take that one," he said. "No charge. Consider it a gift for keeping an old man company on a slow evening." I started, but he waved his hand gently. "Please," he said. "It makes me happy to see books go to people who will read them." I thanked him, sincerely, probably more than was necessary, and tucked the book carefully into my bag. He walked me to the door, moving slowly but steadily. The rain had eased, again, though the sky was still heavy with clouds. "Take care of yourself," he said, handing me my umbrella, "and come back soon." "I will," I promised, and I meant it. I stepped out into the night, the bell chiming softly behind me. The street was quiet, wet and shining under the street lamps. A few cars passed in the distance, their headlights blurred by the mist. I started walking, the Mary Oliver collection safe in my bag, her words still echoing in my mind. There's a line she wrote, I can't remember which poem it's from, about paying attention, about being astonished, about telling the world about it. That night, wandering home through the rain, I felt like I understood what she meant. The bookstore, Harold and his quiet kindness, the warm glow of the lamps, the smell of old paper, the poems that seemed to speak directly to some hidden part of me. Such small things. But when you pay attention, really pay attention, they become enormous. I walked on, the rain a gentle whisper around me, and I thought about how lucky I was to have stumbled into that store on this particular night. A random turn, a light left on, a door that happened to be open. Sometimes that's all it takes. By the time I reached the end of the street, the rain had slowed to almost nothing. But the night still held that soft, hushed quality, the kind that makes even the most ordinary corners of the city feel sacred. I pulled my coat tighter and kept walking. There would be other bookstores, other poems, other quiet encounters with kind strangers. But this night, this particular collection of moments would stay with me. A gift, wrapped in rain and old paper. A reminder that the world, for all its noise and hurry, still has these pockets of gentleness waiting to be found. As I turned the corner toward the main avenue, I saw a taxi idling near the curb, its yellow light glowing softly through the mist. I hadn't planned to take a cab home, but something about the way it sat there, patient, waiting, like it had been expecting me, made me pause. Story 4. Taxi. Home. The taxi was old, an older model than most of the ones you see in the city these days. Its yellow paint had faded slightly, and the headlights gave off a warm, almost golden glow. I stood on the curb for a moment, watching it idle. The rain had thinned to a fine mist, more like dew than an actual downpour. My umbrella was still folded under my arm, unnecessary now, but comforting to hold. I thought about walking the rest of the way home. It wasn't far, maybe 20 minutes, if I took the shortcut through the park. But my feet ached a little from all the wandering I'd done that evening, and there was something inviting about the warmth radiating from the car's interior. I walked up to the window and tapped lightly. The driver looked up. A man in his type 50s, maybe 60s, with salt and pepper hair and a calm, weathered face. He rolled down the window, and a wave of warm air drifted out, carrying the faint scent of coffee and something else. Pine, perhaps, from an air freshener hanging from the mirror. Where to? He asked, his voice low and unhurried. I gave him my address, and he nodded. Hop in, he said. I'll have you there in 15 minutes or so. I slid into the back seat, pulling the door closed behind me with a satisfying thunk. The interior was exactly what I'd expected. Worn but clean, with leather seats that had softened over years of use. A small radio sat on the dashboard, playing something soft and jazzy at a volume just loud enough to be heard, but not intrusive. The driver pulled away from the curb, and I settled into my seat. Through the window, the city slid past in a blur of wet pavement and glowing lights. The street lamps reflected off every surface. Puddles, windows, the roofs of parked cars. It was like driving through a watercolor painting, all soft edges and muted colors. We didn't talk at first. The silence was comfortable, the kind that doesn't demand to be filled. I let my head rest against the seat and watched the rain-blurred world go by. After a few minutes, the driver spoke. "Long night?" he asked, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. "Not really," I said. "Just a slow one. The good kind." He nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "Those are the best ones," he said. "The nights when nothing much happens, but everything feels right." I thought about that, about the cafe, the bookstore, the rain. Nothing dramatic had happened, no grand revelations, no life-changing moments. Just a series of small, quiet experiences, strung together like beads on a thread. "Yeah," I agreed. "That's exactly it." We drove on in easy silence. The jazz on the radio shifted to something slower, a piano piece, gentle and melancholy. It seemed to match the rhythm of the rain, the hum of the engine, the quiet pulse of the city at night. I found myself thinking about the driver, wondering how many nights he'd spent like this, driving through the rain, ferrying strangers from one part of the city to another. How many stories he must have heard, how many lives he'd glimpsed through brief conversations. There's something intimate about a taxi ride. You're sharing a small space with someone you'll probably never see again. And maybe because of that, because there's no future to worry about, you can be a little more open, a little more honest. "Do you like this work?" I asked, surprising myself. He considered the question for a moment. "Most nights," he said, "it's quiet work. You meet all kinds of people. Some good, some not so good. But on nights like this, when the rain's falling and the city's calm, there's nowhere I'd rather be." He paused, adjusting the rear-view mirror slightly. "I used to drive during the day," he continued, "but the traffic wore me out. All that honking, all that rushing. At night, it's different. The city breathes slower." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I know what you mean," I said. "I've always preferred the night. Everything feels more possible somehow." He chuckled softly. "That's a nice way to put it." We turned onto a wider avenue, and the lights grew brighter. A few more cars appeared on the road, their headlights cutting through the mist. But the feeling inside the taxi remained the same. Quiet, enclosed, separate from the world outside. I recognized the neighborhood. We were getting close now. The driver slowed as we approached my street, peering at the building numbers. "This one here?" he asked, pointing to the familiar entrance. "That's it," I said. He pulled up to the curb and put the car in park. I reached for my wallet, but he shook his head. "It's a flat fare this time of night," he said. 10 even. I handed him a 20 and told him to keep the change. He looked at the bill, then at me, and his face softened. "Thank you," he said. "That's very kind." "Thank you for the ride," I replied. "And the conversation." He nodded, a small, sincere nod. "Get home safe now," he said. "Stay dry." I smiled, pushed open the door, and stepped out into the mist. The taxi waited until I reached the door of my building before pulling away. I watched its taillights fade down the street, disappearing around the corner, carrying that quiet warmth with it. I stood in front of my building for a moment, breathing in the cool, rain-fresh air. The night was almost over, but it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a pause, a soft comma in the middle of a longer sentence. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The lobby was quiet. The elevator was waiting. 4th floor, I was almost home. As I rode the elevator up, I thought about the driver's words, about quiet work, about the city breathing slower at night, about how sometimes the most meaningful moments happen when you're not looking for them. I'd taken hundreds of taxi rides in my life. Most of them I'd forgotten before I reached my destination. But this one, this simple, rain-soaked journey from one part of the city to another, felt different. Maybe it was the conversation. Maybe it was the jazz on the radio, or the way the lights blurred through the wet windows. Or maybe I was just in the right frame of mind to notice what was always there. The elevator doors opened and I stepped out into the hallway. My apartment was just a few steps away. I could see the door, familiar and welcoming, waiting to close behind me and let the night finally settle. But before I put the key in the lock, I paused for just a moment. There was one more thing I wanted to do before this night was over. One small ritual I'd been saving for the end. I set my bag down by the door and stood there for a moment, just breathing. Home. The word felt different tonight. Fuller, somehow. Warmer. I slipped off my damp shoes and placed them on the small mat by the entrance. My socks left faint impressions on the wooden floor as I padded toward the kitchen, and I could hear the rain tapping steadily against the windows, like an old friend who had followed me all the way here. The apartment was dark except for the small light above the stove that I always left on. It cast a gentle amber glow across the countertops, making everything look soft and welcoming. I didn't turn on any other lights. Not yet. There was something about the dimness that felt right, like the night outside had asked permission to come in, and I had said yes. I walked to the window above the sink and looked out at the city. From my 5th floor apartment, I could see the street below, glistening with rain. The traffic lights changed from green to yellow to red, their colors bleeding into the wet pavement like watercolors on paper. A few cars passed by, their headlights cutting through the darkness, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the muffled sound of a siren, already fading. I had lived in this apartment for 3 years now. It wasn't large, just a 1-bedroom with a small living area and a kitchen that was really just an extension of the hallway. But it was mine. And tonight, after everything, it felt like the most perfect place in the world. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. The flame caught with a soft click in a blue glow, and I watched it for a moment before turning away to gather what I needed. A cup from the cabinet, the tin of loose-leaf chamomile that I kept on the second shelf, the small ceramic teapot with the chipped handle that I had found at a flea market years ago and couldn't bring myself to replace. There was a ritual to making tea. That was something I had learned slowly over the years. It wasn't just about the drink itself. It was about the waiting, the measuring, the attention you gave to something so simple. It was about slowing down enough to notice the steam rising from the kettle, the way the dried flowers unfurled in hot water, the first deep breath of something fragrant and warm. While the water heated, I walked to the living room and lit the candle on my coffee table. It was a small thing in a glass jar, vanilla and sandalwood, the kind that reminded me of bookstores and hotel lobbies and quiet Sunday mornings. The flame flickered to life and began to cast dancing shadows across the walls, and I stood there for a moment, just watching it. The rain was louder here, right against the window. I had one of those large windows that took up most of the wall, and when it rained like this, the whole thing became a canvas of water and light. Droplets raced each other down the glass, leaving trails that caught the glow from the streetlights outside. The city beyond was a blur of shapes and colors, softened and dreamlike, like a memory you can almost but not quite hold on to. I pulled the curtains back all the way so I could see better. Across the street, in the apartment building that mirrored mine, I could see glimpses of other lives. A kitchen light on the 3rd floor where someone moved back and forth, probably cooking dinner. A blue glow on the 7th floor that might have been a television. A window on the 4th floor where I could just make out the shape of someone standing, looking out, maybe doing exactly what I was doing right now. I wondered about them sometimes, the people in those windows, what their days had been like, what they were thinking about as the rain fell, whether they felt as small and as held as I did in moments like this, when the city was quiet and the night was soft and everything seemed both very close and very far away. The kettle began to whistle. I walked back to the kitchen and turned off the flame, and the whistle faded into a gentle hiss before going silent. I poured the water slowly into the teapot, watching the steam rise and curl, and then I put the lid on and let it steep. 3 minutes. That was how long chamomile needed. Long enough to release its warmth, but not so long that it became bitter. I used the time to change out of my work clothes. In my bedroom, I peeled off my damp sweater and my slightly rumpled blouse. I stepped out of my slacks and left them in a pile on the chair that I use for exactly this purpose. Then I opened my closet and found my favorite pajamas. The soft ones with the tiny flower print that had faded from so many washes. The ones that felt like wearing a hug. I pulled them on and already felt different. Lighter, more myself. There was something about coming home and changing clothes that always felt like a small transformation, like you were shedding the day and stepping into a gentler version of yourself. The version that didn't have to be anywhere or do anything. The version that was allowed to just be. I grabbed a pair of thick socks from my drawer and pulled them on too. The floor was cold tonight. I could feel the rain in the air, even inside. That slight dampness that crept through the windows and settled into everything. But it wasn't unpleasant. It just made the warmth feel more valuable, more earned. When I came back to the kitchen, the tea was ready. I poured it carefully into my cup, watching the golden liquid fill the white ceramic. Steam rose from the surface, carrying that familiar scent of chamomile and honey. And I added just a small spoonful of honey, because that was how I liked it. Sweet enough to taste, not so sweet that it overwhelmed. Then I carried my cup to the living room and settled into my spot by the window. I had a small armchair there, just big enough for one person, with a worn cushion and a throw blanket draped over the back. I had arranged it years ago so that it faced the window at just the right angle, close enough to watch the rain, far enough to stay warm and dry. I curled my legs underneath me and pulled the blanket over my lap. The tea was still too hot to drink, so I just held it in my hands, letting the warmth seep into my palms. My fingers were still cold from the walk home, and the heat felt like medicine, like my body remembering what comfort was supposed to feel like. Outside, the rain continued. It had settled into that steady, rhythmic pattern that could last for hours. Not quite a downpour, not quite a drizzle, just a constant, patient presence. The kind of rain that didn't demand anything from you. It just fell, and you could either fight it or surrender to it. And I had learned a long time ago that surrendering was always easier. I thought about the day I'd had. It hadn't been extraordinary, just a regular Tuesday. Meetings in the morning that ran too long. Lunch at my desk because there wasn't time for anything else. Emails that seemed to multiply no matter how many I answered. A moment in the afternoon when I looked out the window and noticed it had started to rain, and something in my chest had loosened just a little. The rain had felt like a gift. Like the universe was offering me an excuse to slow down, to cancel my evening plans, which I hadn't really wanted to keep anyway, to come home early and do exactly this. Sit in my quiet apartment with a cup of tea and watch the water fall and not think about anything at all. I took my first sip of tea. It was still hot, almost too hot, but the warmth traveled down my throat and into my chest, and I felt something unclench inside me. The chamomile was gentle and sweet, with that slightly grassy undertone that I had grown to love. It tasted like calm, like permission. I settled deeper into the chair and let my eyes go soft. The rain on the window became a blur of light and motion. The candle on the coffee table flickered gently, casting its warm glow across the room, and I sat there, just breathing, just being, just existing in this small pocket of peace that I had carved out for myself. I don't know how long I sat like that. Time moves differently on rainy nights. It stretches and contracts in unexpected ways. Minutes feel like hours, and hours feel like minutes. And at some point, you stop trying to keep track and just let yourself drift. My phone buzzed once, somewhere in my bag by the door. I didn't get up to check it. Whatever it was could wait. The world outside could keep spinning without me for a little while longer. Right now, in this moment, there was nothing more important than this chair and this tea and this rain and this feeling of being completely, utterly home. I thought about how I had felt that morning. Rushed, anxious, already behind before the day had even started. I had spilled coffee on my shirt and had to change at the last minute. I had missed my usual bus and had to take the later one. I had arrived at work with my hair still damp from the shower and my thoughts already scattered. But all of that felt very far away now, like it had happened to someone else, in some other life. The version of me that had rushed through the morning was not the same version sitting here now. This version was softer, slower, more forgiving. I took another sip of tea and watched a droplet race down the window pane. It merged with another droplet near the bottom, and together they slid down and disappeared. I don't know why I found that so fascinating, but I did. The way water always finds its way. The way everything eventually settles where it's supposed to be. There was a lesson in that, I thought. But I was too tired to figure out what it was, and that was okay. Not everything needed to be a lesson. Sometimes rain was just rain. Sometimes tea was just tea. Sometimes a quiet night at home was nothing more and nothing less than exactly what it appeared to be. My cat appeared from the bedroom, stretching slowly. Her name was Mochi, and she was a small gray tabby with white paws that made her look like she was wearing socks. She had been asleep on my bed, as she usually was when I came home, but now she padded toward me and meowed once, soft and questioning. "Hey, sweet girl," I said. She jumped up onto the arm of the chair and then stepped carefully onto my lap, circling once before settling into a tight curl. I could feel the warmth of her through the blanket, and I rested one hand on her back, feeling the gentle rhythm of her breathing. Mochi had come into my life 2 years ago. I had found her outside the grocery store near my apartment, huddled under a parked car during a thunderstorm. She was so small then, barely more than a kitten, and she had looked at me with these huge green eyes that seemed to hold entire universes of fear and hope. I hadn't planned to get a cat. I hadn't even thought I wanted one. But something about the way she looked at me made it impossible to walk away. I had scooped her up and tucked her inside my jacket and carried her home, and she had been here ever since. Now she purred under my hand, a soft rumbling sound that blended with the rain outside. I smiled and took another sip of tea. This was something I had learned about contentment. It wasn't about having everything you wanted. It wasn't about a perfect life with no problems or worries. It was about moments like this. Small, quiet moments that you might miss entirely if you weren't paying attention. A warm cat, a cup of tea, rain against the window. These were the things that made up a good life, not the big achievements or the impressive milestones. Just the ordinary evenings when you were exactly where you were supposed to be, doing exactly what you were supposed to be doing. I finished my tea and set the empty cup on the side table. I should have gotten up to put it in the sink. I should have started thinking about dinner, about the things I needed to do before bed, about the emails I still hadn't answered. But Mochi was asleep on my lap, and the rain was still falling, and I didn't want to move, so I didn't. I just sat there, watching the water trace patterns on the glass, watching the lights of the city blur and shimmer, watching the steam from my empty cup slowly fade into nothing. I thought about the people I had seen today. The woman on the bus who had been reading a paperback novel with a cracked spine. The barista at the coffee shop near my office who always remembered my order. My coworker who had stopped by my desk to tell me a funny story about her daughter. The stranger on the street who had smiled at me for no reason at all. All these small connections. All these tiny threads that wove through the fabric of a day. Most of them I would never think about again. They would fade into the general blur of memory, indistinguishable from all the other days and all the other people. But right now, in this moment, I could hold them all. That felt important somehow. To remember that every day was made up of people, that every errand and every commute and every ordinary moment was a chance to brush up against another life. To be kind or to be indifferent, to notice or to overlook, to connect or to pass by without a second glance. I tried to be kind, not always successfully. Sometimes I was tired or distracted or too wrapped up in my own thoughts to really see the people around me. But I tried. And on nights like this, when the world felt soft and the rain felt gentle, and I had the space to reflect, I could feel that trying meant something. Mochi shifted on my lap, stretching one paw out before curling up again. I scratched behind her ears, and she purred louder, and I felt a wave of tenderness wash over me. For her, for this apartment, for this life I had built piece by piece over the years. It wasn't perfect. There were things I wished were different, things I was still working toward, things that kept me up at night sometimes. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, everything was exactly as it should be. I let my head fall back against the chair and closed my eyes. The rain was a constant rhythm now, steady and soothing, and I let it wash over me like music. I could feel my breathing slowing down, my thoughts becoming softer around the edges. Not quite sleep, but something close to it. That liminal space where you're still aware, but no longer quite present. I thought about tomorrow. There would be more emails, more meetings, more small stresses and ordinary challenges. There would be moments when I felt overwhelmed, and moments when I felt lost, and moments when I wondered if I was doing any of this right. That was just how life worked. You couldn't escape the hard parts, but you could build spaces like this, small sanctuaries of peace that you could return to at the end of the day. Rituals that reminded you who you were and what mattered. Moments of quiet that balanced out all the noise. That was what this apartment had become for me. Not just a place to live, but a place to breathe. A place where I could set down the weight of the day and remember that I was more than my to-do list, more than my job title, more than the sum of my responsibilities. I was a person who liked tea and rainy nights and candlelight. I was a person who loved her cat and her small apartment and her view of the city. I was a person who found peace in the ordinary, and beauty in the overlooked, and comfort in the simple act of coming home. And that was enough. That would always be enough. The rain began to soften, not stopping, just easing into something gentler. The drops on the window became smaller, more scattered, and the sound shifted from a steady drumming to a quiet whisper. I opened my eyes and watched the change. The way the city outside seemed to relax along with the weather. A few more lights had turned on in the building across the street. People coming home from work, from dinner, from wherever their days had taken them. All of them returning to their own small spaces, their own quiet rituals, their own versions of this moment that I was having right now. We were all alone together, I thought, separated by walls and windows and all the distance of individual lives, but also connected by the same rain, the same night, the same city that held us all. There was something comforting in that. The idea that everyone was just doing their best to make it through, to find their small comforts, to build their tiny kingdoms of peace. I looked down at Mochi, still sleeping peacefully on my lap. Her whiskers twitched slightly, chasing something in a dream, and I smiled. She didn't know anything about the worries of human life, about bills and deadlines and relationships and all the complicated things that kept us up at night. She just knew warmth and food and the soft sound of my voice. Maybe there was wisdom in that too, in living simply, in taking comfort where you found it, in not overthinking every moment but just being present in it. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. The candle on the coffee table was burning low now, the wax pooling around the wick, the flame smaller but still steady. I would need to blow it out before bed. I would need to carefully transfer Mochi to the couch so I could get up. I would need to do all the small tasks of ending a day and beginning a night. But not yet. For now, I could stay a little longer. The tea was gone, and the cup was cold, and the rain was fading, but the feeling remained. That deep, quiet contentment that came from being exactly where you belonged. From knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, you had this chair, this window, this moment of perfect peace. I watched another droplet slide down the glass. It moved slowly, catching the light from the street lamp outside, and I followed its path all the way to the bottom of the pane. There was something meditative about it, something that asked nothing of me but attention. I gave it gladly. I gave my attention to the rain and the light and the soft warmth of the cat on my lap. I gave my attention to the candle and the blanket and the lingering taste of chamomile on my tongue. I gave my attention to this life, this ordinary life, that was somehow extraordinary in all the ways that mattered. And I felt grateful, not for anything specific, but for everything at once. For the day that had passed, and the night that was here, and the sleep that was coming. For the city outside my window, and the home inside these walls. For all of it. All the ordinary, beautiful pieces of a life well lived. Eventually, I would move. I would gently shift mochi and blow out the candle, and pad to the kitchen to put my cup in the sink. I would brush my teeth and wash my face, and climb into bed with my book, reading until my eyes got heavy. I would fall asleep to the last whispers of rain, and I would wake tomorrow to whatever the new day brought. But that was later. This was now, and now was perfect. Now was tea by the window on a rainy night. Now was a cat purring on my lap and a candle burning low and the city settling into sleep outside. Now was everything I needed, wrapped up in a single ordinary evening that I would carry with me like a gift. Time. 800 millions. I smiled in the darkness, and I stayed just a little longer. Some nights become memories before they're even over. You're living them, but somehow you're also watching yourself live them. You're present, but you're also already looking back. Already nostalgic for a moment that hasn't finished happening yet. This was one of those nights. I knew I would remember this. Years from now, when I was older and my life had taken turns, I couldn't yet imagine I would think about this rainy Tuesday night. I would remember the way the light looked through the window, the way the tea tasted, the weight of mochi on my lap, and the sound of the rain fading into silence. And I would smile, just as I was smiling now. Time 800 moons. The candle flickered one last time and then settled into a steady glow. I watched it for a long moment, mesmerized by the simple dance of light and shadow. Then I reached out and cupped my hand behind the flame and blew gently. The room went darker, lit now only by the ambient glow from the window, from the city lights reflecting off the rain-wet streets. It was time. Time to end this perfect moment and carry it with me into sleep. I lifted Mochi carefully, cradling her against my chest, and she made a small sound of protest before settling back into slumber. I carried her to the couch and set her down on her favorite blanket, the soft fleece one she liked to knead with her paws. She curled up immediately, not even opening her eyes. "Good girl," I whispered. Then I walked to the kitchen and put my cup in the sink. I would wash it in the morning. Tonight I was too peaceful to worry about small tasks. Tonight, everything could wait. In the bathroom, I went through my nighttime routine on autopilot, washing my face with warm water, applying the moisturizer that smelled like lavender and chamomile, brushing my teeth while looking at myself in the mirror, at the person who had made it through another day and was ready for rest. "You did good today," I told my reflection, and I meant it. In my bedroom, I pulled back the covers and climbed into bed. The sheets were cool against my skin, but they would warm quickly. I arranged my pillows just the way I liked them and pulled the comforter up to my chin. From here, I could still hear the rain, fainter now, a gentle whisper against the window in the other room. I picked up my book from the nightstand. It was a novel I had been reading for weeks now, savoring it slowly because I didn't want it to end. A story about ordinary people living ordinary lives, finding love and loss and meaning in the small moments. The kind of book that felt like a friend. I opened to my bookmarked page and began to read, but the words blurred almost immediately. My eyes were heavy, heavier than I had realized, and the bed was so warm, and the rain was so gentle, and the day had been so long. I made it through half a page before I felt the book slipping from my fingers. I didn't fight it. I set the book aside and reached for the lamp, clicking it off. The room went dark except for the faint glow from the window, where the city lights still flickered through the rain. I closed my eyes. The rain was still there, soft and distant, like a lullaby from the sky. I let it carry me, let it wash over me, let it pull me gently down into sleep. My last thought was of tea, of the way the cup had warmed my hands, of the amber light of the candle, and the gray light of the rain, and the soft weight of a sleeping cat, of all the small things that added up to a good life. And then I was asleep, deep and peaceful, wrapped in the sounds of the city, settling into night. The rain continued to fall, gentler and gentler, washing everything clean. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges and its own joys. But for now, there was only this: rest, peace, home. And as I drifted deeper into dreams, I carried with me all the moments of the day. The last bus in the rain, where it all began. The cafe that was about to close, warm and welcoming in the storm. The late-night bookstore with its dusty shelves and kind owner. The quiet taxi ride through empty streets. And finally, tea by the window, where the day came to rest. 5 moments. 5 ordinary pieces of an ordinary life. Each one a small gift. Each one a reminder that beauty lives in the overlooked corners. That peace can be found in the pause between heartbeats. That home is not just a place, but a feeling you carry with you wherever you go. The rain continued to fall outside my window, and I slept deeply, completely, at peace. And so we come to the end of our first collection of rainy bedtime stories. Tonight, we traveled together through the quiet hours of the city. We rode the last bus through rain-soaked streets. We found warmth in a cafe that was about to close. We discovered treasures in a late-night bookstore. We watched the city blur past from the window of a quiet taxi. And finally, we came home to tea by the window, where the day gently released its hold. These are the moments that make up a life. Small, ordinary, easily overlooked. But when we pay attention, when we slow down enough to really see them, they become something more. They become the texture of our days, the memories we carry forward, the quiet joys that sustain us. I hope these stories have wrapped around you like a warm blanket. I hope the rain outside your window, or the rain in your imagination, has washed away the worries of your day. I hope you're feeling peaceful now, ready for rest, ready for dreams. If you enjoyed this journey through the rain, I would be so grateful if you would like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me create more of these quiet spaces for you, more stories to help you drift into sleep, more rainy nights to share together. And if you turn on notifications, you'll always know when a new episode is waiting for you. But for now, let go of all of that. Let go of everything except this moment. The softness of your pillow, the weight of your blankets, the gentle rhythm of your breathing. Time 700 miles. Sleep is coming. You can feel it, can't you? That heaviness in your eyelids, that loosening in your limbs, that quiet settling of your thoughts. Let it come. Let the rain carry you. You are safe here. You are warm. You are exactly where you need to be. Good night, dear listener. Sleep well. And I'll see you in the next rainy night.